Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey, and today a very special guest, Paul Finebaum from ESPN and the SEC Network. Paul, how you doing today?
Doing great, gentlemen. Anxious to talk about my favorite coach in America.
Well, we'll jump right into that. You and Bob Stoops have had an interesting, I don't know if back and forth is the right word, but you've had some things to say about Bob Stoops and what he said about the Southeastern Conference and their performance. I'm trying to think of even how to say it. It's just, what do you think about Bob Stoops? Because I think a lot of people have this perception that you don't like Bob or don't like Oklahoma football.
No, and really nothing could be further from the truth. I've known Bob not well. I met him when he worked for Steve Spurrier, and I've seen him a couple of times along the way, and I've always admired him. In fact, we've had him on our program. He's always been very gracious, and then this thing happened last year when I don't even remember the first time he took a shot and I fired back, and then it really came to a head in an article I did with Jason right before the Sugar Bowl, when I just gave Oklahoma no chance and predicted it would be a beatdown, and then the morning of the game I was in Pasadena on SportsCenter, and I just reiterated that. And then the next day, after hearing from people think we're just so invested in this. Listen, I watched the game and started laughing. It was just comical the way Alabama handled it themselves. And I came on SportsCenter, and what are you supposed to do? Quibble or just? I said, hey, I'm an idiot. And that was, to me, it was over. I wrote about him in this book we did, and gave him credit, and then and whenever he would say something, I would just respond. Listen, it's not a big deal. I'm sure Bob Stoops would be hard pressed to even pick me out of a lineup. So I think that's the back and forth that's really been going on.
How well did you said you met him a few times when he worked at Florida. Did you interview him? Did you get to know him very well at that time, or no?
Well, I knew Spurrier quite well, and I would often speak down there and come by and see Spurrier afterwards, and he let me sit in on some meetings, and so I knew him. Listen, I don't claim to have known him well, although I remember the day he was hired, Spurrier. It was actually about 2 or 3 weeks after Nebraska blew out Florida in the national championship game, and I was playing golf with Spurrier in Alabama. And I actually mentioned, I said, I don't know what you're doing to replace the defensive coordinator. And he said, I just hired a guy. Like, don't even waste my time. Because a friend of mine had just lost his job, and I was just going to make sure he knew that. He said, I hired this guy. He's going to be great. And he didn't even tell me who it was. And obviously it came out about a week later. It was Bob. But no, I don't remember seeing him much after that. Alabama had a 2-game series with OU, and I was out in Norman, and obviously Oklahoma came back the next year. And, I had a blast. I loved going to Oklahoma. I'd never been. So, really, not to ruin a good story, from my standpoint, it's really not personal at all. It's just fun. And I'm sure from Bob's standpoint, he really probably doesn't care one bit. So that's the extent of it.
Well, everybody needs a foil, right? And Bob Stoops has the SEC and vice versa.
But let me assure you, as a Tennessee graduate, I'll be screaming from the top of a tall building on Saturday night if Tennessee pulls the shocker of the century, which, by the way, I am not predicting.
And I know you tried to send Bob a copy of your book once. I don't know if he got it the second time, but the first time when you told me that you'd sent it to him, I asked him before his press conference if he'd gotten it, and he looked confused, and he said no. And I said, well, he wrote about you a little bit in it, and it's about the SEC. And he stood up and started to walk away and goes, well, he can't call me a liar, and walked away. So,
well, I did send him one pretty quickly after I got back from the tour. And for whatever reason, I just kept checking FedEx, and it just wouldn't deliver it. I thought it was, I don't know if it was refused. And finally, after Jason, when you told me that, I overnighted it at great expense, I might add. I mean, I dropped $37.47 on Bob Stoops, and I put a text notification. So he did get it. Now, whether he admits it or not, and whether he'll ever read it, I really don't know. And frankly, I don't care. But I just wanted to make sure he got it.
Paul, you've built up this, I don't know if cult following is the right word, but just an immense following in the South, and especially in the SEC footprint. Overall, what's your relationship like with the callers and the fans of the SEC when you get out and do your shows every week and talk to these people?
Most of the time it's really good. You get to know fans when you do a show like this, and for those who don't know, for many years the show emanated out of Birmingham. So I mean, you went to an Alabama game and you would run into them. You went out to lunch, you would run into them. About a year ago, I moved to Charlotte to go to work for ESPN. So yeah, I'm not in as close a contact, but other than when they call every day. So you do get to know them. I mean, it's like an extended family. I mean, not a weird family, I might add, but still a cool. It's still a cool relationship, and I think that's the key to what we do. And I'm not saying it's different. I mean, there are talk shows all over the country that have regular callers. I think this one though is unique in that it does have a national platform on satellite and on now the SEC network, which is owned cooperative. It's a cooperative ownership between the SEC and ESPN. And they become, they develop personalities, and I did write about them. And by the way, they don't care for Bob at all. But that's okay. I mean, I'm a student of the game, and I've followed Oklahoma for a very long time. I couldn't wait, Bob, not to get off track here, but I couldn't wait to get out there for the very first time. And that was, I think it was 2002 when Alabama played out there, and it was the second week of the season. And it was just a typical, normal 105-degree day in Norman. Then the stadium was being renovated. And I don't know if I've ever been that hot in my entire life.
Yeah. I don't doubt it.
It's been like
By
that.
the way, not to change the subject, but last year for game day, I went to Stillwater for the first time, and I don't know if I've ever been this cold in my life. We arrived on a Friday morning during an ice storm, and I did not have a jacket, and we did the show. I was the only guy on the set who did not have an overcoat because these guys are smart. They they actually check the temperature before they leave. I was just happy to be there.
Yeah, it's you've experienced Oklahoma then in your 2 days, because that's sort of what can happen. Luckily, this weekend it's supposed to be beautiful, 70-degree weather, perfect football night for Tennessee coming to town.
Yeah, and even though as I said, I'm a fan of the SEC and a graduate of Tennessee, I have found the reaction of Tennessee fans on our show this week, pretty laughable. I mean, they really do think they're going to win, and I've gotten in trouble for saying teams have no chance of winning, but this time Tennessee has no chance of winning. So maybe I'll be wrong again.
Maybe so. You never know.
No. Paul, you sent me a copy of your book too, and I read it in a day, and I thought it was great. And coming back to the callers, the way you write about them, it really was pretty moving in parts, because it seems like for as crazy as they can be on the air, it seems like you genuinely care about them.
Well, I do, Jason, and you really do. Not to overstate it, but some you become closer to than others, and there have been times when something happens to a caller, you go visit them in a hospital. In fact, about 3 years ago, a caller passed away, and his wife called me the next day and said, I would really like you to give the eulogy. I've done that a couple of times, and it's a very strange feeling because until a couple of years ago, I had never done that before. And you stand up there to someone primarily through a radio show, but you also know that you're saying goodbye to him, and the people there. This is the most important moment for them. It's the send off, and I mean you have to take it pretty seriously. This isn't just a radio show where if you have a bad day, you're back on Friday. So I've learned a lot from that, and I mean some of it's a little overdone because I bet on a less serious note, there may be 20 or 30 callers who honestly believe the show would not be on without them. But that's kind of the method to the madness.
Have you been surprised at the sort of cultural phenomenon that this show has become?
I have. It's extremely unique, and while I would agree and admit that there are many call-in shows around the country, there are few that have the passion of these callers. And I mean, listen, it's pretty well known that the most famous caller to our show, or maybe to any show in history, was Harvey Updike. He called in a couple of years ago, and he admitted he poisoned a tree at Auburn. I think Harvey thought he was being funny. I don't think he realized that he would go to jail later for committing a felony. So yeah, I mean, you do get thrown into some interesting situations. That by far that was the most interesting.
You mentioned Harvey. I got to ask. I saw a story about him recently that he's having trouble paying Auburn back. I mean, have you stayed in touch with him?
To a point. I visited him in jail, and I mean, I'm not sure this is something I'm really proud of, but I obtained the only in-jail interview with Harvey Updike, which we had to hold for the publication of the book, and quite frankly, it wasn't all that revealing. A couple of times since then, I've heard from him, but lately I have been able to avoid him, and I think that's for the best.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tennessee and how you expect Oklahoma to win this weekend. What has happened to the Tennessee program over, say, the last decade since Phil Fulmer left? I mean, when I was growing up watching SEC football, Tennessee was the program, and obviously now that's not the case.
Well, a series of events, a confluence of calamities, really. Fulmer needed to go. He had the program had slipped, and then the athletic director had a great idea. Let's hire this young coach who has already been fired by Al Davis in Oakland, and that was of course Lane Kiffin. And Kiffin started out okay, but when he kept getting in trouble. He started a feud with Urban Meyer. He nearly beat Alabama, as some people remember, during their national championship season. And ultimately, he decided to leave when SC came to him, and he trashed the program on the way out. And in a reaction, as programs often do, the same AD hired Derek Dooley, who was just simply not qualified for the job, and ran it right off the road in a 4-year period. And you lose 5 years, maybe 6, because Fulmer's last year was a bust, and you are going to get set back. Butch Jones, to his credit, has recruited really in a terrific way, but so he's got 2 recruiting seasons. That's not enough. I mean, you'll see that against Oklahoma. I mean, this is a better team, but just simply not capable of staying on the same field with a top 10 team.
Do you think that Butch Jones is making enough progress with the program?
I think so. Now, check back with me at 11 o'clock Saturday night. Because, this happened last year. He started off well and then went to Oregon and just got eviscerated. And I think if that happens, a lot of the bubble will be burst. The problem for Tennessee, though, is 2 weeks from now they'll play at Georgia. Then they have a home game against Florida. Then they're on the road to Ole Miss, and then obviously Alabama. So, I mean, depending. One school of thought is, hey, just call up Oklahoma and say, we'll forfeit, we'll take the loss and preserve the rest of the year, or do what you have to do and try to compete. I think Tennessee can gain from this game by being competitive. Competitive in my book would be 2 to 3 touchdowns. But if this becomes a runaway, then I think a lot of the good that he's done will go down the drain.
obviously this year being the first year of the college football playoff, I'm curious just your thoughts on that. I mean, do you think 4 teams is enough, and do you think they'll eventually expand it?
I think it's a start. I mean, again, we all know the brilliant minds of the BCS said they'd never change, and then they did.
Right.
And so I'm pretty pleased that we have 4. I think there'll be resistance to change, but at some point, I really do believe it's going to go to 8. It's hard to make that prediction right now, though, but I really think once this thing takes off, and I think it's going to be phenomenal, it will eventually become bigger and better.
And going to the TV show and ESPN and Game Day and all the production of that, you made a successful transition from newspaper to radio. What's that transition from radio to TV been like?
It's not too bad, although I must admit, you do a radio show on television, and you sit there, and every time you look at the monitor, there is your face. I'm in my late 50s. It's not, I'm not exactly Kirk Herbstreit. And, I mean, I get tired of looking at myself. I can't imagine what the audience goes through. Having said all that, it's still pretty exciting. I mean, Game Day last year was just unbelievable. I mean, I walked out for the first time, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, here I am, 57 years old, and I'm on Game Day. I mean, I really did feel like I had won, like, American Idol for aging talk show hosts. But I mean, you do get used to it after a while. Although you continue to pinch yourself, I will tell you that.
Speaking of looking at your face on the SEC network. The other day, when I was on your show, somebody tweeted me a picture of the screen. You guys put Andy Staples' picture next to my name. I thought that was pretty funny. You guys probably did me a favor by doing that. We
were simply trying to upgrade the quality of guests.
That's definitely an upgrade.
You do get some crazy things, and that was you have a lot of moving parts. And your radio is really easy. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound like you roll out of bed and turn on the switch. But television, it's a visual medium, so people there are 10 things going on at one time, and in Jason's case, Jason, I would just go ahead and stick with the picture. By the way,
hey, that's fine. You can do that every time. As far as the SEC network, the launch was so successful. It's gotten onto all the major distributors. Have you been surprised by how successful the SEC network launch has been, or is this what you expected?
No, I mean, there's no way you could expect it. There was great trepidation going in that all the hard work, and we've been planning this for a long time. I mean, my part, not nearly as long as theirs, but no one really expected to have almost full distribution at launch, which was I think it was 3 weeks ago this week. And once you hit that, it's almost like, okay, everyone. It's like you have a friend in the hospital who's in ICU, and the doctors are all hovering around, and once he's well, nobody's paying attention. It was that feeling. It was a good feeling, though, that everyone just kind of looked at you and said, "Great." I mean, I won't overwhelm you with statistics, but it's the most successful sports network launch ever, or maybe the most successful cable launch ever. And back to your question 5 minutes ago, no one predicted it. It was we would have been probably pleased with considerably less, but you do know that it's available, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we've watched out here quite a bit, but. Paul, we'll let you get going here pretty quick, but last thing I wanted to ask you, will OU make the college football playoff?
I think they will. Everyone makes their predictions before the season, and then they change them week to week.